I couldn't have asked for a more beautiful day. The backyard was alive with color, streamers in Emma's favorite shades of pink and yellow, a table piled high with cupcakes and snacks, and the laughter of children running around without a care in the world. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. Emma had been talking about her 5th birthday party for months, and I'd gone all out to make sure it was exactly what she dreamed of. A princess-themed extravaganza with a bounce house, games, and even a magician. I wanted this day to be a memory she'd treasure forever. As the sun began to set and the kids gathered around the table for cake, I took a moment to soak it all in. Sarah stood by my side, smiling as Emma blew out her candles. Jake, my best friend of over a decade, was there too, joking with the other parents. It felt good to have everyone I cared about in one place, celebrating this milestone. After the cake, I announced that it was time for the slideshow I'd put together, a collection of photos and videos from Emma's first 5 years. I'd spent hours curating the pictures, carefully choosing moments that captured her joy and growth. I hooked my laptop up to the big screen TV in the living room, where all the guests gathered. The first few slides went off without a hitch. Emma as a baby, her first steps, her first day of preschool. The room was filled with smiles and laughter, and Emma beamed with pride as she saw herself on the screen. And then it happened. I clicked to the next slide, expecting another innocent memory. Instead, the screen filled with an image that made my heart stop. It was Sarah and Jake. The photo wasn't just intimate, it was explicit. Sarah was sitting on Jake's lap, her arms draped around his neck, and the look in her eyes left no room for interpretation. The room went silent. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of mistake, a cruel joke or a glitch in the slideshow. But as the images continued to scroll, it became horrifyingly clear that these weren't accidents. There were more pictures, each one more damning than the last. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Parents shielded their children's eyes, murmuring in shock and disgust. Emma looked up at me, confused by the sudden change in the room's energy. "Daddy?" she asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. I couldn't speak. My hands were frozen on the laptop, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I had shared my life with, and my best friend, betraying me in the most public, humiliating way possible. Sarah's face turned pale as she realized what had happened. She lunged for the laptop, but it was too late. The damage was done. Jake, standing in the back of the room, looked like he wanted to disappear. I don't know how this happened," Sarah stammered, her voice shaking. The room erupted into chaos. Guests began to leave, their eyes filled with pity and judgment. Jake slipped out the door without saying a word, leaving Sarah standing alone in the wreckage. I turned to Emma, who was clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn, tears welling in her big, innocent eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered, kneeling down to her level. "Everything's going to be okay." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. My world had just been shattered, and there was no going back. That night, after the guests had gone and Emma was finally asleep, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty walls. The silence was deafening. The party that was supposed to be a celebration of joy had turned into a nightmare, and the people I trusted most had been the ones to destroy it. But even in the midst of my despair, one thing was clear. I couldn't let this define me. For Emma's sake, I had to pick up the pieces and find a way forward. The days following Emma's birthday party felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I'd replay the scene over and over in my head. The photos, the gasps, Sarah's pale face, Jake's silent retreat. I'd built my entire world around trust and loyalty, and in one gut-wrenching evening, it had all been torn apart. The house was eerily quiet now. Sarah stayed in the guest room, and while she attempted to put on a brave face around Emma, we barely exchanged words. Every glance, every accidental brush past each other, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken accusations. "Liam, we need to talk," she said one evening as I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee machine. Her voice was hesitant, a far cry from the confident tone I was used to. I turned to face her, keeping my expression neutral. "Talk about what, Sarah?" "About how you and Jake betrayed me. About how you let this come out in front of our daughter and everyone we know." She flinched, her eyes welling with tears. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't want anyone to find out, especially not Emma." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "So, what? You were just going to keep sneaking around with my best friend forever? Until when, Sarah?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, her tone defensive now. "It happened during a rough patch, Liam. You were working late every night, and I felt alone. Jake was there, and it just happened." Her words only fueled my anger. "It just happened?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's your excuse? While I was working myself to exhaustion to provide for this family, you were having an affair with my best friend." Sarah opened her mouth to respond but seemed to think better of it. She looked down, her hands twisting nervously. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I hurt you, but I never meant for it to get this far." Her apology felt hollow. The damage was already done, and no amount of remorse could undo the humiliation, the betrayal, or the pain. Meanwhile, Jake had completely disappeared. No calls, no texts, not even an email to explain himself. I wasn't sure if his silence was out of guilt or cowardice, but either way, it only deepened the sense of betrayal. The only person who truly stepped up was Rachel, my sister. She came over the day after the party, uninvited but very much needed. "Liam, you don't have to do this alone," she said, hugging me tightly as I stood frozen in the doorway. I didn't say anything, but I didn't push her away, either. Rachel stayed for hours, helping me sort through the aftermath. She brought dinner, cleaned up the decorations still hanging from the party, and listened as I vented everything I'd been holding in. She said it started during a rough patch. I told Rachel, pacing the living room. "Like that justifies any of this." Rachel frowned, her arms crossed. "That's not an excuse. Plenty of couples go through rough patches without betraying each other. This is on her, Liam, and on Jake. Don't let them make you feel like this is your fault." I nodded, but the guilt still lingered. Maybe I had worked too much. Maybe I hadn't been as present as I should have been. But did that really give Sarah and Jake the right to do what they did? As if things weren't already difficult enough, Emma began to notice the tension. She was too young to understand the details, but she wasn't oblivious. "Daddy, why is Mommy sleeping in the other room?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Sometimes grown-ups need a little space, sweetheart," I said finally. She frowned. "Are you and Mommy mad at each other?" I forced a smile, even though my heart was breaking. "It's complicated, Emma, but no matter what, we both love you very much. That will never change." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but as I sat by her bed, watching her drift off to sleep, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I had to protect her from this mess, even if it meant putting my own pain aside. That night, I made a promise to myself. No matter how bad things got, I wouldn't let Sarah and Jake's betrayal ruin Emma's childhood. She deserved better. The days turned into weeks, and while the anger and heartbreak didn't fade, I began to focus on what mattered most, Emma's happiness. Rachel continued to check in, offering support whenever I needed it. As for Sarah, her attempts to justify her actions grew less frequent, replaced by awkward silences and strained interactions. It was clear that our marriage was hanging by a thread, but I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. I needed more answers. The anger I felt was overwhelming, but it was the unanswered questions that kept me awake at night. How long had this been going on? What else had they hidden from me? These thoughts gnawed at me, feeding my insomnia and leaving me pacing the quiet halls of the house while Emma slept soundly in her room. I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. One evening, as Sarah stayed holed up in the guest room, I found myself going through the old photo albums stored in our closet. I told myself it was to look for answers, but deep down, I think I was trying to remind myself of the life we'd built together, the life that now felt like a lie. The albums were filled with memories of birthdays, holidays, and family trips. I lingered on a photo of Sarah and Jake from Emma's second birthday party. They were standing next to each other, laughing about something, their smiles wide and genuine. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, knowing what I knew, the picture felt like a slap in the face. As I flipped through the pages, A folded piece of paper fell out from between the photos. I picked it up, my heart racing as I unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, and the first few words made my stomach drop. Sarah, I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. I know this is wrong, but I don't care. I love you. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature to know who it was from. Jake. I stared at the note, the words blurring as anger and betrayal surged through me. This wasn't just some momentary lapse in judgment or a recent affair. This had been going on for years. I turned the house upside down that night, searching for more clues. And I found them. Texts, emails, photos. Each one was like a dagger to the heart, revealing the depth of their deception. The messages painted a picture of a relationship that had started as an emotional connection, while I was working long hours to support our family. They confided in each other, leaned on each other, and eventually crossed every boundary imaginable. I sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal. It wasn't just the affair itself that hurt. It was the realization that Jake, the man I had trusted like a brother, had used our friendship as a way to get closer to Sarah. He had been a guest at our table, a part of our family, and all the while, he had been stabbing me in the back. By the time I confronted Sarah the next day, I had lost whatever patience I had left. Years, Sarah, I said, tossing the pile of evidence onto the kitchen table. This wasn't just a mistake or a rough patch. This was calculated. You and Jake planned this. You lied to me, over and over again. She looked down at the pile, her face pale. Liam, Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't try to explain it away. I know everything now. The notes, the messages, the photos. How long, Sarah? How long have you been lying to me? She hesitated, her lips trembling. It started 3 years ago, she admitted quietly, when Emma was 2. 3 years. The weight of it hit me like a freight train. I had been living a lie for 3 years, oblivious to the betrayal happening right under my nose. I was working my ass off to give you and Emma everything you wanted, I said, my voice shaking with anger. And this is how you repay me? By sleeping with my best friend? Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. I didn't feel sympathy or pity, just anger and a deep, consuming sadness. I never wanted it to get this far, she said, her voice barely audible. It just happened. Stop saying that, I snapped. It didn't just happen. You made a choice. You both did. I turned and walked away, unable to look at her any longer. My hands were trembling, my chest tight with rage. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I tried to make sense of everything. The betrayal wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, ongoing deception. They had taken everything I trusted and twisted it into something ugly. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I wasn't going to let them win. I had spent years sacrificing for my family, and I wasn't about to let Sarah and Jake's selfishness take everything from me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had thought the betrayal couldn't cut any deeper. The affair, the lies, the years of deception, they had already shattered my world. But I was wrong. The knife had another edge, and Sarah was about to twist it. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. Emma was at Rachel's house, happily distracted by her favorite cousin, giving me a rare moment of solitude. I had just poured myself a coffee when Sarah appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. Liam, we need to talk, she said, her voice hesitant. I didn't look up. I think we've said enough, I replied coldly, staring into my mug. She hesitated, wringing her hands. This is important. Please. Something in her tone made me set the mug down and finally meet her gaze. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Whatever she was about to say, I knew it wasn't going to be good. What is it? I asked, crossing my arms. She took a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to speak. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I didn't react. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Excuse me? I said finally, my voice low and sharp. I'm pregnant, she repeated, tears welling in her eyes. A cold, sinking feeling spread through my chest. Is it mine? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head slowly, her voice barely a whisper. It's Jake's. The room seemed to tilt, the weight of her words pressing down on me. My hands clenched into fists, and I had to force myself to stay calm. How long have you known? I asked, my voice trembling with controlled fury. A few weeks, she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and unnatural. Of course, I said, because telling me you're carrying my best friend's baby is such a delicate situation. Liam, please, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was an accident. An accident? I repeated, my anger rising. You don't accidentally get pregnant, Sarah. You made choices, one after another, and now you're trying to call this an accident? She flinched but didn't argue. And Jake? I continued. Does he know? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, he knows. He thinks I should keep it. The room went silent, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. Jake wasn't just complicit in the affair, he was actively supporting Sarah's decision to keep the baby. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was calculated, deliberate, and coordinated. I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. Every moment of our marriage, every sacrifice I had made, every memory we had shared, it all felt like a cruel joke. I can't do this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Liam, please, she said, stepping toward me. I know I've hurt you, but we can figure this out. For Emma's sake. I took a step back, putting distance between us. Don't bring Emma into this, I said sharply. She deserves better than this mess you've created. Tears streamed down her face as she stood there, pleading with me, but I couldn't find it in me to care. I need time to think, I said, turning away from her. And I need you to stay out of my way. I left the house and drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process everything. The betrayal, the lies, the pregnancy. It was too much. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of it all pulling me under. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet. Sarah was in the guest room, the door closed. I didn't bother knocking. I couldn't face her, not yet. Instead, I sat in Emma's room, surrounded by the innocence and simplicity of her world. Her toys, her books, her drawings on the wall. They were a stark contrast to the chaos of my life. I knew I couldn't fall apart. Not for Emma's sake. She needed me to be strong, to protect her from the storm that Sarah and Jake had unleashed. But as I sat there, staring at the stuffed unicorn on her bed, I couldn't help but wonder how much more I could take. There's no handbook for this kind of situation. No guide on how to explain to a 5-year-old that her family is falling apart, that the people she loves and trusts have shattered everything. I had spent days agonizing over how to tell Emma, but no matter how I approached it in my mind, it always felt impossible. It was Rachel who finally convinced me. You can't shield her from this forever, Liam, she said gently as we sat in her living room. She's already picking up on the tension. It's better she hears it from you than figures it out on her own. I knew she was right, but the thought of breaking Emma's heart was unbearable. She was so innocent, so full of love and trust. How could I possibly explain this without ruining that? The next day, I decided it was time. Sarah and I sat down together, the air between us cold and heavy. We had agreed to set aside our anger for Emma's sake, but the tension was palpable. Emma sat cross-legged on the couch, clutching her stuffed unicorn. She looked between us with wide, curious eyes. What's wrong, Daddy? She asked. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Sweetheart, we need to talk about something important. I began, my voice steady but strained. Her little brow furrowed. Is it about why Mommy sleeps in the other room? My heart clenched. She was more perceptive than I had realized. Yes, it is, I said softly. Sometimes, grown-ups go through difficult times, and they need some space to figure things out. Emma glanced at Sarah, then back at me. Are you and Mommy mad at each other? Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling. We've had some disagreements, Emma, but we both love you very much. That will never change. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Are you going to stop being my mommy and daddy? No, sweetheart, I said quickly, reaching out to hold her hand. We'll always be your mommy and daddy. But things are going to be a little different. Mommy and I won't be living together anymore. Her tears spilled over, and she clutched the unicorn tightly. Why? Don't you love each other? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain betrayal and heartbreak to a child? How do you tell them that the family they thought was unbreakable has been shattered? I struggled to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said finally, and those mistakes can make it hard to stay together. But none of this is your fault, Emma. We both love you more than anything in the world. Emma buried her face in the unicorn, her small body shaking with sobs. I glanced at Sarah, who was wiping tears from her own eyes. For a brief moment, we shared a look of mutual understanding. This was the price of our choices, and Emma was paying it. After what felt like an eternity, Emma lifted her head, her face red and tear-streaked. I don't want you to go, she said, her voice breaking. I hugged her tightly, my heart breaking all over again. I know, sweetheart. I know, but I promise I'll always be here for you, no matter what. Over the next few days, I focused on making the transition as smooth as possible for Emma. I moved into a small, cozy house not far from Rachel's, where Emma would have her own room filled with all her favorite things. Jake's wife, Lauren, was going through a similar process. She had reached out to me shortly after Sarah's bombshell, and we had formed an unlikely alliance. Our kids don't deserve this, she said during one of our conversations. We have to protect them, no matter what. Lauren and I coordinated therapy sessions for the children, hoping to help them navigate the confusion and pain. Emma, along with Jake and Lauren's 2 kids, began attending weekly sessions with a child psychologist. At first, Emma was hesitant, clinging to me every time we arrived at the office. But over time, she began to open up, sharing her feelings in ways I hadn't expected. Why do grown-ups make mistakes? She asked one evening after a session. I hesitated, struggling to find an answer. Because sometimes we forget what's most important, I said finally. But the important thing is that we learn from those mistakes and try to be better. Emma nodded, as if that explanation made sense to her. You're not going to make any more mistakes, right, Daddy? I hugged her tightly, my throat tight with emotion. I'll do my best, sweetheart. I promise. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. Emma was my priority. No matter how much pain Sarah and Jake's betrayal had caused, I wouldn't let it define Emma's childhood. I couldn't fix the past, but I could fight for her future. The courtroom was sterile and intimidating, the kind of place that made even the innocent feel guilty. I sat at the long table next to Ethan, my lawyer, staring straight ahead as Sarah entered with her attorney. She wouldn't meet my gaze, her focus trained on the floor as she walked to her seat. This was it. The legal battle that would decide everything. Custody of Emma, the division of assets, and, ultimately, the future of our lives. Ethan leaned over to me, his tone low and calm. We've got this, Liam. The evidence speaks for itself. He was right. Over the weeks leading up to the hearing, Ethan and I had uncovered a mountain of evidence that painted a clear picture of Sarah and Jake's betrayal. Financial records, text messages, and even receipts for trips they had taken together. All of it showed the extent of their deception. The first blow came when Ethan presented the financial evidence. Your Honor, he began, standing confidently, we have documentation proving that the defendant, Mrs. Grant, used joint marital funds to finance extramarital activities, including vacations, gifts, and other personal expenses. He handed a stack of papers to the judge, who flipped through them with a furrowed brow. Mrs. Grant, can you explain these expenditures? The judge asked, his tone stern. Sarah's lawyer stood, attempting to downplay the evidence. Your Honor, while these expenses may appear questionable, they do not negate Mrs. Grant's contributions to the household or her role as a mother. Ethan wasn't having it. Your Honor, these were not isolated incidents. This was a pattern of behavior that directly impacted the financial stability of the family. He then presented evidence of a joint account that Sarah and Jake had been using to funnel money for their personal use. My jaw tightened as Ethan explained how they had quietly drained funds over the course of several years, leaving me to unknowingly shoulder the financial burden of our household. The judge turned to Sarah, his expression hard. "Mrs. Grant, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Sarah's voice was barely audible as she responded. I made mistakes," she said, glancing at me briefly before looking away. "But I've always prioritized Emma's well-being." Her words felt hollow, especially when juxtaposed with the mountain of evidence against her. The next part of the proceedings focused on custody. This was the part that mattered most to me. Ethan presented my case with precision, highlighting my role as a stable, reliable parent. He spoke about my efforts to protect Emma from the fallout of Sarah's actions, my commitment to providing her with a loving home, and the steps I had taken to ensure her emotional well-being. Lauren, Jake's soon-to-be ex-wife, even testified on my behalf. "Liam has been a constant in Emma's life," she said firmly. "He's done everything he can to shield her from the chaos. He's a wonderful father." Sarah's lawyer argued that she should retain joint custody, emphasizing her role as Emma's primary caregiver during her early years. But Ethan countered with devastating efficiency. He presented evidence of Sarah's neglectful behavior, text messages where she prioritized her time with Jake over family obligations, financial records showing her frivolous spending, and testimonies from mutual friends who had witnessed her dismissive attitude toward me and Emma. The most damning moment came when Ethan presented Sarah's pregnancy as evidence of her lack of judgment. "Your Honor, the defendant is currently pregnant with the child of her husband's best friend, a relationship that was kept secret from the plaintiff for years. This level of deceit and betrayal raises serious concerns about her ability to prioritize Emma's best interests." The courtroom was silent as the judge processed the information. Sarah looked as though she wanted to disappear, her head bowed low. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my heart pounding. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "All I want is what's best for my daughter. She deserves stability, love, and honesty. I'm not here to punish Sarah. I'm here to fight for Emma." The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. By the end of the proceedings, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of Emma, with Sarah receiving limited visitation rights. The financial settlement ensured that Sarah would not have access to the funds she and Jake had siphoned away. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle had been brutal, but I had fought for Emma and won. "Liam," Ethan said as we walked outside, "you did the right thing. Emma's lucky to have you." I nodded, my thoughts focused on the road ahead. This wasn't just about winning a legal fight. It was about rebuilding a life for Emma and me. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally see a glimpse of sunlight breaking through the clouds. The courtroom ruling marked the beginning of the end for Sarah and Jake. Their carefully crafted facade of control, confidence, and cunning began to crumble under the weight of their choices. Watching it unfold from the sidelines was both satisfying and surreal. Sarah had always prided herself on maintaining appearances. To the outside world, she was the picture of grace and poise, the loving mother and ambitious woman. But with the courtroom loss and the damning evidence exposed, her reputation took a nosedive. The first signs of trouble appeared within her social circle. Friends who once adored her began distancing themselves. Gossip about the affair, the financial deceit, and her betrayal of our family spread like wildfire. People whispered behind her back at school events and neighborhood gatherings. The invitations to brunches and parties stopped coming. Sarah's pregnancy, which she had once seemed intent on hiding, became impossible to ignore. Her growing belly was a constant reminder of her betrayal, and even the most understanding friends found it hard to reconcile their loyalty with the choices she'd made. Then there was Jake. He wasn't just facing personal backlash. His professional life was in tatters. News of the affair had reached his employer, a prestigious firm that valued integrity above all else. They weren't interested in the messy details of his personal life, but the public scandal was too big to ignore. Jake was quietly let go, his contract terminated under the guise of restructuring. Without his hefty salary, the lavish lifestyle he had grown accustomed to began slipping through his fingers. The fallout from their decisions forced Sarah, and Jake into survival mode. With no steady income and mounting debts, they moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Gone were the fancy dinners, designer clothes, and luxury vacations. Their world had shrunk to a fraction of what it once was. I learned most of this through mutual acquaintances and, occasionally, from Sarah herself during her limited visitation days with Emma. She tried to keep up a brave front, but it was clear she was struggling. "It's been hard," she admitted one afternoon as she picked Emma up for her scheduled visit. Her voice was quiet, her eyes tired. "That's what happens when you burn your bridges, Sarah," I replied, my tone neutral. She didn't argue. Jake and Sarah's relationship, once built on the thrill of secrecy and forbidden romance, began to crack under the pressure of reality. The financial strain, combined with the constant judgment from those around them, took its toll. Arguments replaced the laughter that had once defined their connection, and the rosy image of their future together faded into bitterness. I couldn't deny the grim satisfaction I felt knowing they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. For years, they had built their lives on lies and betrayal, and now, the foundation was collapsing beneath them. Meanwhile, Emma and I were finding our rhythm in our new life. The smaller house had become a cozy haven, filled with love and laughter. Rachel visited often, bringing warmth and support that I had come to rely on. Emma, ever resilient, was thriving in her new routine. One evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with her wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, is Mommy okay?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "She's figuring some things out, sweetheart," I said finally. "But she loves you very much." Emma nodded, seeming to accept my answer. "I love her too," she said softly. Her innocence was a reminder of why I had fought so hard. No matter what had happened between Sarah and me, Emma's happiness and well-being were all that mattered. As for Sarah and Jake, their story was no longer my concern. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. The house wasn't much, at least not compared to the one we used to live in. It was smaller, older, and didn't have the sprawling backyard Emma loved so much. But it was ours, cozy, peaceful, and untouched by the ghosts of betrayal that lingered in our old home. Emma adjusted quickly, which came as a relief. Her room was the first thing I set up after we moved in, filling it with her favorite stuffed animals, books, and a new princess-themed bedspread. The smile on her face when she saw it for the first time made every exhausting moment of the move worth it. "It's perfect, Daddy," she squealed, throwing her arms around my neck. I hugged her tightly, a lump forming in my throat. She didn't know how much I needed to hear that. Rachel visited often, helping me navigate the challenges of single parenthood. She had a way of making everything seem manageable, whether it was meal planning, helping Emma with her homework, or simply sitting with me on the couch and reminding me that I wasn't alone. "You're doing great, Liam," she said one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching Emma chase fireflies in the small yard. "Emma's happy, and that's what matters." I nodded, watching my daughter's carefree laughter light up the night. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of everything threatened to pull me under. But moments like this reminded me why I was fighting so hard to build a better life. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on something other than the past. I poured my energy into new projects, finding a renewed sense of purpose in my career. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and I was surprised by the outpouring of support I received. "Liam, we've got your back," one coworker said during a team meeting. "You've been through hell, but you're stronger for it." Their words meant more than I could express. For so long, I had felt like a failure, like I had somehow caused the collapse of my marriage. But now, I was beginning to see that Sarah and Jake's choices were not a reflection of me. Emma thrived in her new environment. She made friends easily at her new school, her bubbly personality drawing others to her like a magnet. She joined the school's art club, proudly showing me her paintings and drawings each week. "Look, Daddy, I made this for you," she exclaimed one evening, holding up a crayon drawing of our new house. It wasn't just a house, though. She had drawn the two of us standing in front of it, hand in hand, with big smiles on our faces. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, fighting back tears as I hugged her. Emma's resilience inspired me. She had been through so much, yet she remained full of love and hope. If she could find joy in the little things, then so could I. Lauren and I stayed in touch, our shared experiences creating an unexpected bond. She was navigating her own challenges as a single parent, but her strength and determination were remarkable. One afternoon, we met at a park so our kids could play together. As we watched them race down the slides and chase each other around the playground, Lauren turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "For yourself," she said. "Not as a dad or an ex-husband, but as Liam. What do you want your life to look like?" I thought about her question for a long moment. For so long, my focus had been on survival, getting through each day, protecting Emma, and rebuilding what had been broken. I hadn't allowed myself to think beyond that. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm starting to feel like I can figure it out." Lauren smiled. "You will. And when you do, it's going to be amazing." Her words stayed with me. Slowly but surely, I began to let go of the pain and anger that had consumed me for so long. I started looking ahead, imagining a future where happiness wasn't just a distant dream but a reality within reach. I redecorated the house, filling it with bright colors and personal touches that made it feel like home. I took up running again, finding solace in the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement. I even started painting with Emma, our kitchen table often covered in messy, colorful creations. Each day felt like a step forward, a small victory in the journey to rebuild my life. And through it all, Emma was my anchor, her laughter and love reminding me of what truly mattered. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Emma leaned her head against my shoulder and sighed contentedly. "I love our new house, Daddy," she said. "It feels happy." I kissed the top of her head, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Me too, sweetheart," I said. "Me too." For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The first sign of Sarah and Jake's unraveling came through whispers from mutual acquaintances. I hadn't asked for updates on their lives, honestly. I didn't care to know. But the information found its way to me anyway. "They're struggling," one friend mentioned offhandedly. "Jake lost his job and Sarah, well, let's just say the spark seems to be gone." It wasn't surprising. Relationships built on betrayal rarely survive the weight of reality, and theirs was no exception. The infatuation and thrill that had fueled their affair were no match for financial strain, public judgment, and the responsibility of raising a child together. I heard that Jake had bounced from one temporary job to another, unable to find anything stable. The company that once valued him had quietly severed ties after the scandal became public, and word of his untrustworthiness seemed to follow him wherever he went. As for Sarah, she was grappling with the consequences of her choices. Her friends had distanced themselves, her social circle shrinking to almost nothing. The confident, glamorous woman who had once thrown elaborate parties was now a shadow of her former self. I wasn't proud of the satisfaction I felt hearing these things, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel like a form of justice. They had taken everything from me, and now life was repaying the favor. The final blow to their illusion of happiness came with the birth of their child. I found out through Lauren, who had heard it from one of Jake's relatives. Sarah had the baby, Lauren told me during one of our park meetups. A boy. Healthy, thankfully, but... She trailed off, her expression unreadable. "But what?" I prompted. "They're struggling, Liam. Financially, emotionally, everything. Jake can't hold a job, and Sarah's burned so many bridges that she doesn't have much support. It's all falling apart." I nodded, unsure of how to feel. On one hand, I didn't wish harm on the baby. He was innocent in all of this. But on the other, it was hard not to feel a grim sense of karma watching their lives crumble. Lauren, ever the optimist, added, "At least now you can focus on yourself and Emma. Let them deal with the mess they created." She was right, of course. My life had become infinitely better without the chaos Sarah and Jake had brought into it. Lauren's journey mirrored mine in many ways. She had finalized her divorce from Jake, creating a new life for herself and her kids. She even met someone new, a kind, patient man who treated her with the love and respect she deserved. Seeing her find happiness gave me hope. If she could move forward, so could I. One evening, After dropping Emma off at Rachel's for a sleepover, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me had begun to fade, replaced by something quieter: acceptance. Sarah and Jake's downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was Emma's laughter, the warmth of my home, and the peace I had found in building a life free from betrayal. As I sat there, I realized I hadn't thought about Sarah or Jake in days. They no longer held power over me. Their struggles were their own, and I had no desire to intervene or even witness it anymore. My focus was on Emma and the future we were creating together. She was thriving, her days filled with school, art projects, and playdates. Her happiness was all the proof I needed that I was on the right path. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and raised a quiet toast to the life I had rebuilt. To new beginnings, I said softly, the words a promise to myself. It's strange how life can take you from devastation to clarity, from heartbreak to hope. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here now, feeling content, even optimistic about the future, I wouldn't have believed you. But here I was, on the other side of the storm, stronger and wiser for having weathered it. Emma was my anchor through it all. Every laugh, every hug, every wide-eyed question reminded me of what mattered most. She had grown so much over the past year, her resilience a testament to the love and stability I worked so hard to provide. We'd settled into a rhythm in our new home. Saturday mornings were reserved for pancakes and cartoons, and Sunday afternoons were for trips to the park or art projects that left the kitchen table covered in glitter and paint. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was better in so many ways. It was ours. One evening, as I tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at me with her big, curious eyes. "Daddy, are you happy?" she asked, her voice soft. The question caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm very happy." She smiled, satisfied with my answer. "Good. I love it when you're happy." After she fell asleep, I sat on the couch, reflecting on her question. Happiness wasn't something I had allowed myself to think about for a long time. For months, my focus had been on survival, on picking up the pieces and building a life for Emma. But now, for the first time, I felt like I had space to think about what came next. Rachel had been encouraging me to put myself out there, to consider dating again. "You deserve to find someone who appreciates you, Liam," she said one evening as we sat on the back porch. "Someone who sees what an amazing person you are." I laughed, shaking my head. "I think I'm a long way from being ready for that." "Maybe," she said with a knowing smile. "But when you are, don't hold yourself back." Her words stayed with me. I wasn't ready yet, but the idea didn't feel impossible anymore. I had learned so much about myself over the past year, what I wanted, what I valued, and what I wouldn't tolerate. When the time came, I knew I'd approach love with a clearer sense of who I was and what I deserved. Lauren's journey gave me hope, too. Seeing her find happiness again after everything she had been through reminded me that healing was possible. She and her new partner were building something beautiful together, and while our friendship remained strictly platonic, her strength and resilience were a constant source of inspiration. As the months passed, life continued to unfold in small, joyful moments. Emma's artwork filled the walls of our home, her laughter echoing through the halls. I took up running again, finding solace in the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement. I even signed up for a painting class, rediscovering a passion I had long forgotten. One evening, I stood on the balcony, a cup of tea in hand, and looked out at the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet contentment that came from knowing I had weathered the worst and come out stronger. The betrayal that had once defined my life was now just a chapter in my story, a reminder of how far I had come. I didn't hate Sarah or Jake anymore. I simply didn't think about them. They were part of my past, and my focus was on the future. As I stood there, the words Emma had spoken earlier echoed in my mind. "Daddy, are you happy?" Yes, I thought. I am. And I was ready to keep moving forward, one step at a time, with hope in my heart and the strength to embrace whatever came next.